Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 15, Episode 93. He's Joe Clark. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Monday, Steelers Nation. Joe Clark filling in for Dave Bryan, who should be back for the Wednesday show. He's finishing up his trip, and so we'll talk to him and recap everything that's happened for the next podcast. But until then, we got Joe filling in. You guys know him. He was just down there at the Shrine Bowl down there in Texas and was on a recent Depot roundtable. So, Joe, how you doing? Thanks for being on.
Yeah, no, doing really well. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. All right, pretty quiet weekend. Again, this is the lull between the post-All-Star games, the Shrine Bowl, the Senior Bowl, and the NFL Combine that will begin in about 10 days or so. And we'll have a couple of guys, Ross, Jonathan. Joe, are you going to the Combine too?
I am.
Nice. Okay, so that's always the highlight, to talk to players, talk to Omar Khan, who speaks privately with the media, and then also he'll be on the podium for one of those days and always get some good information. And will be good to hear from Omar Khan and what's going to be a really important offseason for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So for the here and now, the big development, Joe, over the weekend was Pittsburgh officially, doing two things. One, expected, procedural almost, one, something that they had to do and to fill, but didn't know the exact name. So off the top, team Friday night, some news dumps. They released Preston Smith, the edge rusher, expected, never was going to end up, playing on the roster under his current salary in 2025. Pittsburgh saving over $13 million in cap space before roster displacement. So trade acquisition at the deadline, appeared in, I believe, 8 games, played sparingly when the group got healthy late in the season. Smith inactive for week 17 against the Chiefs, did not play, was not dressed for the playoff loss to Baltimore. So that move was entirely expected. It was a matter of just when they would do it. They're doing it early to probably allow Smith some extra time to find his next home. So completely expected, but the move is official. Preston Smith released, Joe.
Yeah, no, not a surprise at all. 7th round pick for him. I think you got when he played in the second half, he made some plays. He had that sack against the Commanders. I believe he had another one, finished with 2 sacks. I mean, it was just a team that needed depth. Highsmith was banged up. Herb Big was banged up at times throughout the season. And he came in, he gave them depth. And when guys got healthy, he took a back seat. I mean, he didn't have the same special teams ability as Jeremiah Moon, as your 4th outside linebacker. So he was really just there as, your pass rush, edge rusher. He was kind of took a back seat in Green Bay. So an easy acquisition there and did his job. I guess you can't rule out the possibility of him coming back maybe on like a veteran benefit deal as a free agent, but Steelers still have 4 outside linebackers on their roster now. And Smith, like as you said, Smith had to be released with his cap hit, and Steelers will now look to move on and see if they want to make an addition to that room or roll with the 4 that they currently have.
I've gotten a couple of questions like that. Could he be re-signed? Could they sign him to a cheaper deal? Never going to rule things out entirely, but I would be surprised. That typically just hasn't happened to players Pittsburgh has released. Usually a pay cut could be negotiated beforehand, but even so, because I think Smith wants to be a number 3 outside linebacker, at the very least, he started throughout the majority of his career. Come back to Pittsburgh to be, as you said, maybe a number 4, not playing much, no real special teams value. I think he's going to want to explore all other options before considering a return to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think it would really be a last resort if for some reason there's just no interest out there on the market.
Mm-hmm.
Can I bring him back right around camp time? But I wouldn't put that as likely.
Overall, though, I'm not mad at the trade. Like you said, it was a 7th round pick. You gave up very little to acquire him. You needed depth at the time because your room was hurt and you didn't want to, get caught short again when they had to really do some stuff early in the season with some practice squad guys. But Leota had to come up. The other guy whose name is slipping my mind right now.
Bawar, Ola, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
a Dangy something. It
yes,
slipped my
yes,
mind.
Ola
I'm trying to get
Adanji.
the pronunciation was what I was trying to grasp at. But yeah, we're on the same page there. So
Yeah.
I will say Pittsburgh. I think one thing that has changed under Omar Khan that I think Kevin Colbert lacked in those final couple of years was really having great edge depth, protecting, insulating themselves from the potential of a TJ Watt getting injured or an Alex Highsmith. We saw in that 2022 season, they really didn't have that kind of depth there. They make a trade for Malik Reed, or 2021, whatever year that was, where they added Malik Reed, and it really felt the lack and how paper thin they were at such a critical position defensively. So you see the additions of a Nick Herbig, of trading for Preston Smith. So you've seen this team really make some moves to add depth. Yeah, I think getting a veteran free agent will be tough to do because of the landscape of the room. There's a top three established. It's hard to convince somebody to come in to be that number four. But could you draft somebody late on day three to really make sure you continue to have high quality depth? Not out of the question.
Yeah, I think I would not be surprised with this edge class. There's a lot of guys that kind of fit that mold for Pittsburgh if they took a flyer on somebody in day three. They meet with everybody during, the Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, but I know we wrote up the middle with Ahmed Hassanian. Again, I need to get that pronunciation down for Boise State, and they met with a few other edge guys. So, I mean, not Jeremiah Smith. Preston Smith came and did his job. Jeremiah Moon, he's a good special teamer, but he didn't really pop when he played on the field when on team defense. So I wouldn't be as surprised if they brought somebody else in to kind of compete and see if you can have somebody who can give you some of that special teams value and maybe be more of an impactful guy in those 5 to 10 snaps a game.
I know Dave was a fan of Johnny Walker from Mizzou and talked about him, I think, during the Shrine Bowl process. He did not get a combine invite, which is interesting and sort of surprising, but also indicates he's probably going to be a late day three type of a guy. And so could Pittsburgh potentially use one of those seventh round picks on him? Just musing right now, not putting that as a concrete thought, but that seems to be possible. And as you said, Moon was a guy that was, to me, when they claimed him off of waivers and kind of that unique ish situation where they claimed him before the 2024 Super Bowl and then officially were awarded him right after the Super Bowl. He was a really raw, underdeveloped guy. He was at Florida, had some injuries. He's got really unique size. He's a big guy. He's a long guy. I think he's strong. I think he can play against the run. But to me, Joe, he was really underdeveloped as a pass rusher. There really wasn't any pass rush plan. There were some questions about overall athleticism. I think with some more time, I don't think he'll ever translate into a high-end starting caliber rusher, but could he be a number four that rotates in for 10 snaps and can bump up to number three if there's an injury? I don't want to discount that either, what they currently have.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I think he absolutely deserves a chance to go and compete and fight for his role. I mean, he beat out Kyron Johnson, had a strong training camp. He had a strong training camp in preseason, so I think he absolutely deserves the chance to come in and compete again. It's just a matter of if they do find somebody that they think could be maybe a little bit of an upgrade. And like you said, Johnny Walker, he has a lot of pass rush juice. I'm not really sure the special teams value is going to be there as much, but yeah, I mean, I like Moon. I think another full offseason development with Pittsburgh is going to be good for him. And so we'll see how things shake out. I mean, there'll be, as always, will be a lot of, those bottom of the roster battles in Latrobe. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're writing about Moon and just being in one of those again this offseason or this training camp.
Agreed. And remember, he got hurt with that ankle injury too. He was beat up in camp a little bit. He missed some time and then had that ankle injury, started the year off on IR. And so there was even developmental time missed in the summer
hmm
and early fall, early regular season because of that ankle injury. So him staying healthy, of course, is key. But if he can do that for a whole off-season cycle, that'll be good for him and good for the team.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So from one former Packers linebacker to one former Packers linebackers coach, who's now currently and officially the Steelers' new inside linebackers coach. That is Scott McCurley, officially hired by the Steelers. It came right after the Preston Smith news on Friday. It's interesting. I didn't hear about many names interviewed and speculated about throughout this off-ball linebacker coaching search. Journey, you can say. It's not exactly the most headline news to hear who they might have considered for the job, but it really just was McCurley is all we heard about at the time of hiring. So he was former Green Bay Packers linebackers coach for a long time. He got hired by Mike McCarthy when McCarthy got hired by Green Bay in 2006 and was there the entire time through 2018. Wasn't the linebackers coach the entire time. In fact, he was never officially the linebackers coach. He was really the assistant linebackers coach late in his Packers career. He started off as a kind of an intern and then just catch-all assistant, moved up to defensive quality control coach and then assistant linebackers coach in 2014 after Kevin Green stepped down or departed, whatever the story was there, leaving Green Bay. And so he ended up going to Dallas whenever McCarthy got hired in 2020 with the Cowboys, officially became the linebackers coach there and is now coming really back home to Pittsburgh. McCurley's a Pittsburgh native who grew up in Newcastle, went to Mohawk High School, and then attended Pitt and played linebacker for the Panthers as a walk-on. So the real thing to know about him, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Joe, is that he's a McCarthy loyalist. I mean, again, he's followed him through his entire NFL career. He stayed in Green Bay. He followed him to Dallas in 2020. And so this is going to be his first NFL job not on a Mike McCarthy coach staff of his career, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, no, that's going to be interesting to see. Um, he's worked with some, pretty high level linebackers throughout his time. He got, when Blake Martinez was in Green Bay, even though he was the assistant there, that was some of the best football Blake Martinez played in his career. Leighton Vander Esch, DeMarvion Overshown had a big jump this year before he got hurt. So, you look at the overall body of work and you like it. It's just going to be interesting to see how a guy that's only worked under one head coach his entire career and a lot of the same assistants that come with that to adapt into a new organization. But I think, given the fact he's from Pittsburgh, he played at Pitt, all that's going to obviously help ease his transition. And these guys are all professionals, so I don't really think it's going to be too big of a hurdle. But it's certainly interesting to see a guy that's only worked under one coach in his whole career to see how that's now going to shift and the philosophies and tendencies that he's going to have to adapt to working under Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh. So that'll definitely be kind of a storyline to pay attention to early on this offseason and heading into OTAs and minicamp and all that.
I've yet to write my big book article on McCurley the way I did Gerald Alexander. I will do it hopefully for the next 24, 48 hours. I began doing a lot of research on McCurley last night. Again, Pitt guy, Western PA native, Pittsburgh hires those guys quite frequently. For any diehard Pitt fans, you probably already know this, but in 1999, as a freshman, McCurley had a really key role in a win over Notre Dame, had a blocked field goal, had an interception late in that game off a tip pass as well. And so that kind of got him into some Pitt lore for a brief time. Never ended up doing anything beyond his 4 years at Pitt. Really didn't even play that much at Pitt. That game is kind of the game he's known for when they had a bunch of injuries that season. Pitt did. Was a grad assistant at Pitt right after his college career ended and then got the opportunity from McCarthy. He is such a loyalist in that sense that in 2019, when McCarthy and the Packers parted ways and McCarthy was out of football for the year, that McCurley passed up the opportunity to take a job at LSU as a defensive analyst. He was offered. He turned it down to stay with McCarthy. And what they did, it was called the McCarthy Circle. There was some term I'll have to look up and it'll be in the article about. But in that interim off year 2019, it was McCarthy, it was McCurley, it was Frank Signetti Jr. and Jim Haslett was this like inner circle of McCarthy friends, and they called themselves the NFL's 33rd team before the actual website I guess existed. And all they would do is do tape study and watch the NFL each week and go over scheme and NFL trends. And so that was kind of what they did for the year, to kind of take a step back, observe the rest of the league, and kind of wait for McCarthy's next chance, which he got the following year in 2020 in Dallas, and McCurley was brought on as linebackers coach. And so there's some quotes that'll be in the article about him. There is a real intense and fierce loyalty to Mike McCarthy, understandable considering that McCarthy helped give him his first NFL job and kept him on staff in Green Bay. So just interesting there. That's kind of my big takeaway so far is, like I said, just how big of a connection there's been with McCarthy himself, of course, a Western PA native.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, could McCurley then be one and done in Pittsburgh if McCarthy winds up and lands another NFL gig next year and brings him back aboard? So that's something to at least, have in the back of your mind to consider. He's a guy that has been with him this whole time that, McCarthy lands somewhere next year, he could easily go and follow him and take, take the same, linebackers coach led role, or they might have to give him like a different title to make it an upgrade. I don't necessarily know how the positional coaches jumping works, but something to definitely think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good thought, and it'd be interesting to note. I don't know if McCarthy would do that, because he'll be under contract and kind of paying respect to Pittsburgh and Western PA. But that's a lot of speculation on my part. I mean, technically, Pittsburgh could block it unless there was some sort of upgrade for McCurley's role if he was DC, which I'm sure wouldn't be the case. And then McCurley will be under contract. Positional coaches in Pittsburgh typically sign 2-year deals. So it's not like he could freely move, but we'll address that next season, assuming it becomes relevant, assuming that McCarthy becomes the head coach, which I think is likely, but who the heck knows, how hiring cycles go. So, I'm trying to figure out more about McCurley, the coach, and the scheme, what he prioritizes. I'm still kind of scratching the surface in my research on that. I was kind of doing the beginning of his coaching and football career and background before kind of getting into some more scheme and X's and O's. There isn't seemingly a ton out there, but I'm going to do some additional digging. I know the reputation in Dallas was not very kind to McCurley for whatever it's worth, and positional coaches are always tough to judge. But fans and some guys I've talked to in Dallas weren't the biggest fans of him. As you said, there were some impressive developments he had with some young linebackers. I know Dallas got crushed by injuries. I think in 2020 three or 2024. I think it was 2023. It was 2 years ago where they got really hammered by injuries at off-ball linebacker. So how much is that cloud? The work that the guy's done is hard to say, but just my impression is that Dallas fans didn't love the job he was doing.
Yeah, and I do think the injuries did play a big part in that. I mean, this year at Overshown get hurt, and then I thought, I mean, from what I saw of Dallas, I thought Maris Diafu was his replacement. I think he was a third round pick. I thought he stepped in and he actually played pretty well for the Cowboys. So, I mean, at least in that sense, a little bit of a positive development there. But yeah, I mean, there was definitely somewhat of performance. I mean, all around with the Cowboys this past season, and I'm sure overall with the linebackers, they're not happy. I mean, Cowboys fans are rarely happy, but
True.
definitely something to take note of.
Joe, what is your impression just overall of the coaching changes Pittsburgh has made, and maybe more importantly, the changes that they haven't made? It seems like the two that are coming is already happened. Swapping out DB's coach Grady Brown for Gerald Alexander, replacing Aaron Curry for Scott McCurley. How do you feel about the moves overall? Should there have been more? Is it just right? What's your impression?
I just sum up in one word would be confusion, given the two moves that they have made. I don't think anybody really anticipated that, the sweeping change, or not even sweeping, but the changes are coming, that the changes would be Grady Brown and Aaron Curry, who are two young coaches that seem to be pretty highly thought of around the league. And both of them, had done a pretty solid job in their roles. I mean, I guess you can look this year and say, oh, Dante Jackson regressed if you're talking about Grady Brown, and Minka's last 2 seasons haven't been super splashy, but I thought overall, I mean, he's done a really solid job. And this year for Aaron Curry, really, I mean, Patrick Queen had an up and down season, but I thought Pete and Wilson also didn't, explode and pop, but I thought he generally was pretty solid. Um, I thought both those guys got a good amount out of their rooms, and they're up and coming coaches. So for those two guys to be the ones who left, I think is a big surprise. Then just overall, we haven't seen that. I mean, those are the only two changes. I mean, I think I wouldn't have been opposed to moving on from Pat Meyer, given that the fact that the offensive line hasn't really taken any sort of big step forward, and the Steelers want to be this ground and pound, run the football sort of team. And you could have gone out and tried to get, a real veteran offensive line coach that has, a good reputation coming in, like they did when they hired Munchak. They're probably not going to get somebody at that level, but go in and get, a well-respected offensive line coach. Instead, it looks like they're going to stick with Meyer for another year. And just generally, there just have been a lot of changes. I mean, I think at this point, one might be like swapping out the chairs here with some, maybe we get a new offensive assistant or a defensive
Mhm.
assistant. But it doesn't seem like anything else is really happening. So I don't love it right now. I mean, you can't judge, you can't judge McCurley. We've have Gerald Alexander. He did a fine job when he was the assistant to Grady Brown, but so you can't really judge these guys like, oh, they're bad hires. It's not going to work out given, we're a week after the Super Bowl. But the
Sure.
fact that they're replacing Brown and Curry makes it tough to really get excited about these moves because you're losing two guys who look like they could be, maybe down the line future defensive coordinators even, or at least, they were impactful position coaches and impactful assistants. So losing out or moving on from those two just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me at all. And I'm not thrilled about it.
I guess it sounds like from some of the beat reporting, and you can just think about it too, is because of the communication issues that Pittsburgh had, which seemed to primarily stem from the secondary and in the linebacking core, is that maybe that's the reason why those guys were not brought back. And again, they weren't technically fired, their contracts were not renewed, which is how 95% of coaches in Pittsburgh exit. It's rarely a firing. It happens occasionally. Of course, Matt Canada midseason, which was still a move they took way too long to actually do. They should have done that before the 2023 season began. But yeah, I guess it's the communication aspect that Pittsburgh was so unhappy with, and reasonably and rightfully so. It was a disaster, and it got fixed too late in this season, but it did finally get cleaned up. Yeah, I mean, for a team that espoused changes, and we're still relatively early in the offseason. We have a whole free agency cycle and draft cycle to go through. But for a team that talked about changes, to have your two changes being bringing back a coach you already had for 2 seasons in Gerald Alexander and hiring the local Western PA guy in Scott McCurley doesn't feel like big changes to the organization that were kind of teased and talked about by Mike Tomlin that exit press conference following the wild card loss. And I will say, just based on my initial search, and like you said, give these guys a fair shake. We'll see how it goes. You don't want to prejudge these guys because they were just hired by the team. The Alexander hire excites me a lot more than McCurley. Alexander is younger. He's got a lot of energy. I do think stylistically, Pittsburgh wanted a different type of personality in the DB's room. I do like Alexander's body of work overall. His takeaway culture and focus, which has been really important in Pittsburgh and developed by guys like Terrell Austin, by Grady Brown. Hopefully, Alexander can further that. McCurley just feels, I don't know. Again, I don't want to be too harsh because the hire was just made. I still have a lot more to learn. The talent on the field is still going to ultimately dictate how well this group will perform. But I'm really whelmed by the McCurley hire. This one just feels pretty flat to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And as you said about Alexander, we got a chance to see him last year. He was coaching at the Shrine Bowl, and he really is, an in-your-face kind of guy. He'd get up in players' faces, positive encouragement. And guy does something wrong, he's going to correct it. He's not going to, tell him he did something wrong, but then he'll show him exactly how to correct it. I was actually really impressed watching him last year at the Shrine Bowl. We paid a lot of attention to the linebacker class last year, and he was coaching the linebackers there, which is kind of odd because he's always been a DB coach, but he, for whatever reason, he was the linebackers coach there last year, but he was, super in your face kind of guy, super energetic, running all over the field, getting fired up. So I agree. I do like the Alexander hire, the McCurley hire. Feels safe, but we'll see what happens when they hit the field.
Yeah, I don't know what it is with the local ties. Just because you're a Western PA guy, it seems to really get you in the door. And I guess that's commonplace in a lot of just businesses in general beyond sports. If you know the guy, you're from the area, that's kind of always a benefit. But I don't know. It just feels like this guy's just always followed McCarthy around. That's kind of why he's had a job, and now he's just kind of coming back home. And it just feels pretty. I get, it's hard to pick out who you would have wanted. Ideally, I talked about Cato June a lot. I would have really liked Cato June. I know that would have been a projection his first time leading a room, but I think that would have been a good transition from Curry um, to somebody like a Cato June. McCurley just feels like maybe going in the wrong direction, but we'll see. Time will tell. And ultimately, Patrick Queen in year 2 and how well he kind of settles in and gets comfortable, and Peyton Wilson's development will all be a lot more key and important to the success of the room than maybe McCurley himself.
Yeah, definitely. And I wonder how much, the progression of Queen led to this hire, getting a veteran in the room, somebody that can, I mean, they want to get more out of Queen than they got this year. He was he was okay, but I think he was a little more up and down. And you have a veteran now that's worked with guys, like AJ Hawk and Clay Matthews and
Hmm.
Leighton Vander Esch. So you get somebody that's worked with some, high level players in the past. So maybe that factors into it a little bit. But yeah, as you said, just doesn't really feel like anything, like any super special hire, especially when you had a guy like Curry who seemed to be up and coming. And now you have a guy that's been a coach in the league for a decade and is only coached under one head coach. Hasn't really seemed to have many other opportunities elsewhere anyway. Like you said, when the year off, his offer was from LSU. Who knows? Maybe he did get other NFL offers, but definitely not super exciting when you're losing on a coach in Curry who was floated, by Sports Illustrated last year as a future defensive coordinator candidate.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. Sure. I mean, I do think maybe, as you said, the benefit from McCurley, the upside is that he is a veteran coach, and maybe they wanted more of that presence than a guy like Curry, who was younger. First time he was leading a linebacker room was in Pittsburgh. He was an assistant in Charlotte for a season, and then for a season or two in Seattle, where he formerly played before Pittsburgh hired him to replace Brian Flores. So maybe that's the optimistic side of McCurley, a guy that just, like you said, has coached a lot of guys, a lot of veteran guys. I know he was part of that Clay Matthews transition, brief as it was, to inside linebacker in Green Bay. As you mentioned, Vander Esch, and Dallas and some of the local guys or the more recent guys you talked about, the rookies. So we'll see. How do you feel about Queen in year two? Do you think some of those year one in Pittsburgh struggles was because he just was overvalued, just not as good as Pittsburgh thought and hoped he would be, and now playing without Roquan Smith, that gets exposed a bit? Or was that just him trying to settle in, to wear the green dot, to come to a new place, et cetera, et cetera? What do you think was the more likely reason for some of the volatility in his first season in Pittsburgh?
I do think it was more of him trying to settle in and, take on that role as a defensive play caller and having to be the guy to lead the room because he had Smith to fall back on. He could kind of, you know, not that he was overshadowed, but he was somebody that didn't have to, lead the defense. And now he's has the green dot for the first time. He has to really take on that key leadership role, getting used to, a new team, getting acclimated just to like a entirely new coaching staff there. I think so. I think maybe he was and is overvalued a little bit, but I do think he is still a really good player and he has a lot of better football than we saw out of him last season. I think another offseason, playing a full offseason with the team. I mean, he was signed in March. He knows what to expect coming into year two. He knows he's going to have to be that guy in the linebacker room. So I think we'll see. I think we'll see a little bit more consistency out of him this year. I mean, I think things got better at least as the year went on last year. I think some of his main struggles happened early in the season. There was some
Mhm.
stuff later in the year, but I think generally he was more solid once we hit the middle part, later half of the season. So I'm hoping we see more of that play from weeks 1 through 18 next year, and not the up and down inconsistency that we saw. So I'm hoping that now that he's settled in and kind of has he's established in Pittsburgh now that he's going to be better.
And Pittsburgh really needs that to be the case. It has to be, year one kind of jitters and laying the foundation more so than him just not being the guy they envisioned. And Peyton Wilson in year two has to continue to ascend. It was a good rookie year for Peyton Wilson. To me, it was really as advertised. His work ethic was on display, his athleticism, his coverage ability, working in nickel packages. But can he improve against the run between the tackles, block shedding, block deconstruction, just overall tackling maybe a little bit, but just getting stronger and stouter against the run to really come downhill. That's going to be key for Peyton Wilson in your number two. And we'll see what happens to a Landon Roberts, a pending free agent, somebody I hope they re-sign, somebody I think they re-sign. If so, he'll continue to be the hammer, downhill guy that really sets the tone against the run.
Yeah, I mean, and that should be a good trio for McCurley to work with year one. I mean, that's you have your defined roles for those three guys, and I mean, I agree with you. I really hope they bring back Roberts as a good tone setter on defense. Seems like a good guy to have in the locker room to work with some of these younger guys. So I'm thinking he probably won't be too expensive, and somebody that I would definitely prioritize bringing back.
I was trying to look to see if there was any pending Cowboys free agent that could potentially float on over to Pittsburgh, especially if I should say Roberts were to leave. I don't think they have anybody at linebacker. Correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, if there is some sort of linebacker, because it was such a young group with all the injuries they've had. I mean, Eric Kendricks, I think he's a free agent, but I don't really see the need to bring in an Eric Kendricks at 33 years old.
Yeah, yeah. Eric Kendricks is the only guy that I saw, and I don't think that would really be much of a fit. As especially as a direct one-to-one Roberts replacement. I think at this point Kendricks is probably well past his prime and can probably find a role. I mean, I know he was rumored to go to the Chargers last year before he ended up signing with Dallas. So he'll find a spot, but I don't think it'll be in Pittsburgh.
Agreed. The one name I did look at and briefly in some of the videos I was watching from McCurley, I only watched one or two, but he had given a lot of praise to Marquise Bell, who's kind of a hybrid, dime type player, dime linebacker who had filled in, started 8 games in 2023 when they were rocked by injuries. And McCurley was singing Bell's praises for stepping in and stepping up. And so wonder if Marquise Bell could potentially be a name. He's though a restricted free agent, so there's some team control aspect, but with a new regime coming on, I mean, kind of a new regime, but a new head coach at Schottenheimer being elevated, retooling that staff, McCurley being out, obviously. I don't know if the DB's coach remained or not, or that whole situation there. But if they don't tender Bell, and they could at the lowest original round tender, he was undrafted free agent. So, well, that means they wouldn't get a draft pick for him. So the point is I want to see what happens to Marquise Bell. If he's not tendered by Dallas, if they go in a different direction. He's young, he's 26, just turned 26. And so could that be an addition? Not that I don't know exactly how that dynamic worked with McCurley coaching him because he was a DB. I guess McCurley had more of a helping hand once, I think Bell kind of played down in the box in 2023, but just a name to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and that's another guy in Dallas that McCurley worked with. He was former Steeler was Keanu Keanu Neal did the same thing in Dallas. He was kind of a hybrid player
Right.
there. I think transitioned to linebacker, so he's got some experience working with that type of player. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm a big fan of those hybrid safety linebacker types, just because you love that athleticism. So somebody to keep an eye on for sure.
That's a really good pull on Keanu Neal. And so, yeah, could that be kind of a 2.0 type of thing or just even play safety that can come down in the box? I've talked about Pittsburgh has a sneaky need at safety for depth. There's really nothing behind Minka Fitzpatrick and Deshaun Elliott right now. Devontae Casey, I assume, is going to hit free agency. Killebrews is a special teamer. Watts missed his entire rookie year with a neck injury that kind of seems to have his status uncertain. I mean, Pittsburgh, I mean, if you lose one of those guys right now, Minka or Elliott, you are in big time trouble.
Oh yeah, yeah. The safety depth is, I think, a very, very underrated, serious need for the Steelers this offseason to add either through the draft or through free agency, preferably through free agency, just to get a veteran in there that can step up in case of injury. But we'll see how they attack it. But it's definitely something that you're going to have to address one way or the other this offseason.
Yep, agreed. All right, so those are seemingly the coaching subtractions and additions. Outgoing Aaron Curry and Grady Brown, incoming Gerald Alexander and Scott McCurley. Again, I'll have my, hopefully kind of deep dive into McCurley. It's not going to be the longest article. There isn't a ton of information out there about McCurley from what I've been able to find. A lot of it's going to revolve around the relationship and loyalty to Mike McCarthy, but that'll be out either for Tuesday or Wednesday, and Dave and I will talk about it a little bit more in depth whenever he comes back for the Wednesday show. Other than that, Preston Smith and McCurley, Joe, it's been pretty quiet overall as expected. We'll see if any more cuts end up coming. What happens to Ogunjobi, Cordero Patterson, maybe a Dean Lowry, somebody like that. We'll just have to wait and see. Pittsburgh typically doing these cuts a bit earlier to allow these guys a chance to find new homes sooner than later. Joe, let's just talk draft here briefly. Is there anybody you've watched lately? I don't know exactly what all you've been doing, but is there anybody that you've watched that you wanted to talk about, or any prospect on your mind you wanted to dive into?
Yeah, the one name I keep coming back to that I watched a decent bit before and after the Shrine Bowl and at the Shrine Bowl is Jordan Phillips out of Maryland. I just think his attitude, everything about him just screams that he would be a really good Steeler. We know Mike Tomlin likes his Maryland kids. He's a defensive tackle. He was on the Feldman's Freaks list. He squatted like 650 pounds. He's got, and an otherworldly amount of power. Mike Locksley compared him to Deron Payne. He said he loves watching Deron Payne, and you can kind of see some of the. He's obviously not Deron Payne yet, but you can see some of the traits that are there. I think learning under Cam Hayward, who he's got a great bull rush. Phillips really impressed with his bull rush, and he's also got a really nice swim move that he won with multiple times watching him at the Shrine Bowl. He's somebody I would really like to grab in day two. I think at this point he's probably established himself as a day two prospect, either in the second or the third round. I think the combine pro day, all that will kind of shake out where in day 2 is going to go. But that's one name that I just keep coming back to for the Steelers. I think whenever I do my mock draft, he's somebody I think I'm going to have in there. Just a name that I don't know. For me, it just really screams that he's going to wind up being a Steeler next season, in some way, shape, or form.
Is he going to be more of a D tackle, a DN? Where do you think he would fit in Pittsburgh's front?
I think he'd probably be more of a D end in the 3-4 D end. I think he could, if they get rid of Ogunjobi, he could kind of take over and be that Ogunjobi replacement. I think he could do either, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers had him at D end.
Hey, let me ask you this, kind of similar to that. What do you think they should do with Keanu Benton? Should he stay at nose tackle? Should he kick out? And he played some end his rookie year when Cam Hayward got hurt. He had done so at Wisconsin. I think early in his Badgers career before becoming more interior nose tackle, one tech, three tech. What do you think's the best fit for Keanu Benton?
I think I would probably keep him at nose tackle at this point, just because I don't know. He's entering year 3. I don't know if you want to move him around into a new position here and kind of. I think if you keep working with him at nose tackle, he's going to continue to develop. I mean, we've seen his pass rush almost get home so many times. At some
Mhm.
point, I think it's finally going to click for him. So I would be in favor. I mean, there's Javon Hargraves, a free agent that could sign him and maybe move Benton out. But I do think keeping Benton at nose tackle is probably going to be best for, getting the most out of him this season. I think you can find some guys to play end, but I mean, I think whatever they do, Benton's going to be a fine player. I just like the idea of keeping him inside just because I think he's going to have a breakthrough at some point just because of how close he's been so many times to kind of, getting home to the quarterback, making some splash plays. I
Mhm.
think, come year 3, that might finally click and he might finally get there.
Yeah, it's been I mean, the potential's there, the athleticism, his hips, his flexibility, his fluidity, his bend is really impressive, but 1 sack last year, not coming until that week 18 finale against the Bengals. I mean, the pressure rate was down a little bit. It's just finding that second move. I've talked about it so much, I sound like a broken
Hmm.
record, but that club over is so potent, it is so stupid good, but there's not much to counter off of that, and so once a lineman season. I did the study, midway through last year. There was such diminishing returns on that move where early in the game it would work. Watch the tape. He's always making an impact play one of the first 3, 4 snaps of the game. But then once that center, that guard sees it that first, second time, they're sitting on it the rest of the way, and that move really loses steam. So can you develop the bull? Can you develop something else or even a different direction? Because it always goes to the same direction to his right, the lineman's left. And so it's not even like he can do it both sides and threaten either shoulder, inside, outside. It's always the inside shoulder of that center, for example. And so that's hurting him. So we'll see. Carl Dunbar once said that he's a nose tackle. He's not at the end, and so Dunbar's still apparently on staff. I'm going to assume he's going to continue playing nose tackle. Benton is until being told otherwise.
Yeah, and I think this offseason, that's gotta be the number one thing he focuses on is developing his second move because that cut up you did was really jarring to see how, potent it was at first and then how he was just completely kind of stonewalled every other time, even against, I mean, we saw it against Tanner Bortolini. Those are, I mean, somebody he went up against Wisconsin, but still a rookie center that kind of completely took him out of the game after he saw it move for the first time. So finding a second move is going to be absolutely paramount to Benton's development and having him become that player who can really be an impact nose next season.
Agreed. Speaking of guys looking to make a jump, had this discussion with Ross a little bit on the Friday show, talking about Jared Alexander. What are your thoughts on Joey Porter Jr. in his second season? I think we can agree it probably wasn't the leap that we hoped that it would be, but was it as bad? I don't want to say that anyone thinks it was bad, but was it as maybe disappointing or underwhelming as some of us think? The penalties obviously were an eyesore, but as Ross and I talked about, still number 1 corner, didn't allow a touchdown the entire season. What do you think Porter's at after year 2 going into year 3?
Yeah, I definitely think a lot of us expected much more of a leap with the way his rookie year went, but I certainly don't think it was bad. I think the penalties were a significant issue, and I mean, especially you look at that Bengals game, they still won that game, but in coverage outside of the penalties, I thought he was generally pretty solid. There's some blips here and there, but I don't think it was, a real disaster of a season. I still think you can rely on him going in as your number one cornerback, like set it in stone for next season. I don't think, we're looking at, oh, maybe he's more of a number two. We need another number one top guy. I think, like, yeah, we did it. He didn't, ascend to a Pro Bowl level player, but he was still a, pretty solid quarterback last season in my eyes. So, has to figure out the penalties. That can't continue to be an issue, but
Mhm.
I don't think it was any sort of a, disaster of a season. I don't think it really changes your thought process or my opinion on him going forward. But would like to see that jump this year to become maybe more of that Pro Bowl caliber player. Year 3 is really when that should happen for him. So, hopefully we get that. If he kind of has another like iffy year this year, then he's entering a contract year the year after. Then I think maybe some more serious discussions have to be had. But as it stands for now, I'm still pretty confident in Joey Porter Jr. being a good player for the Steelers next season and going forward.
Yeah, no, I totally am on the same page with that. I mean, it is going to be, a big year for him to really establish himself. I want him to have that feel of being like a top 10 corner after 2025 ends. I don't think he's there right now. I don't know exactly where he'd rank if you mapped out all of the top corners in football. I don't think he'd be top 10 or even like super close to it, maybe top 15, 20, maybe, but I'm still not even certain exactly where I would slot him. But I don't want to hand wave away the penalties and do this kind of whole how was the rest of the play, Mrs. Lincoln. But putting penalties aside, if you just look at the rest of his body of work and his game, his strengths, weaknesses, I don't see a lot of obvious weaknesses in his game. You'd love for him to be a little more ball production, interceptions. He's got what two NFL interceptions, I think, right now. But
You
he's never been a ball hawk. He wasn't that guy at Penn State. Some guys just simply aren't, and I'm okay with that because you can get that from other places, as last year showed. Even though your top corner had one pick, he's still tied for the NFL lead with 33 takeaways.
Yeah, and I mean, just the way he can press guys at the line of scrimmage and jam, and I mean, the ball might not get thrown his way all that often because guys just aren't going to get open downfield and have the opportunity to make a play. So, I agree. I mean, Dante Jackson had 5, and yeah, a lot of them came off tips or whatever, but it's just guys are getting hands on the ball, and the Steelers have always been the last few years have been a team that's been able to generate turnovers, even if you're a top guy. I mean, Minka only had one last year too, and they still tied for the lead. And I think I mean, he's only had one the last 2 seasons, but I think every year you kind of expect Minka to at least grab a handful, and I don't think, that expectation's changing even after the last 2 seasons. But even so, like, yeah, you don't need the top guys to get picks because guys are over the field have found ways to make plays. I mean, even Levi Wallace last 2 years ago he was terrible, and he even had a handful of interceptions. So, definitely don't need it out of Porter. It would be nice to have, but not a need.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like you said, your top corner had one takeaway and your top safety had 1, 2 in Minka, and you still had 33 as a team, 31 from everybody else. And so to me, that again just shows the value of Pittsburgh's turnover culture, the way they practice turnover circuit drills in training camp, and I'm sure throughout the season to really be a takeaway ball hawk team. I know people dislike Terrell Austin, but since he was hired, I should say, in 2019, no team has more sacks or takeaways than the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, there's talent and personnel, and they had Minka in 2019. Obviously, you got to have good talent to create takeaways and be one of those top teams in those metrics. But still, I don't think it's a coincidence. And again, I just remember watching this team when Austin came on board, really emphasize takeaways more and how they practice. If you don't practice it, you're not going to get it in game. And they really practice it, really focused on takeaways in those turnover circuit drills. And it's no surprise to see Pittsburgh continually and consistently be at the top in that category, even in years where their pass rush isn't as strong as was the case this year, or even when their talent in the secondary was not elite. This is not one of the NFL's best secondaries and best defenses overall. They really faded down the stretch, but they still consistently took the football away.
Yeah, and I hope that's something that can continue going forward. I mean, Grady Brown, they talked about he was in charge of that turn. He was one of the guys in charge of that turnover culture. With him gone, who's going to kind of step up and fill? I mean, Alexander, and I think is more than capable of stepping up and filling that role and taking on that responsibility. And the fact he was in Pittsburgh under Austin should help with that. But just interesting to see how that who kind of carries that torch now that Grady Brown's gone as well.
Yeah, it's going to be important to keep that going for sure. I think Alexander can do it. Obviously, he's been in Pittsburgh, been part of that turnover culture. had some really positive things to write about him in my summary and kind of report on Gerald Alexander and his takeaway mindset. But proof will be in the pudding. All right, Joe. Any other draft guys you've watched that you wanted to talk about?
Um, I mean, I think the quarterback class, it's something we have to talk about. I mean, I'm not hugely in favor of the Steelers taking anybody super early, but if they do, I mean, I like Will Howard. I like Kyle McCord a little bit. Later in the draft, we talked about him. Max Brosmer might be not a terrible day 3 flyer. We saw him at the Shrine Bowl. We talked about him on the round table. Struggled in the game, but was really solid in practice. But I mean, I don't love. I mean, I Jalen Milroe in the second doesn't excite me. All that much just because I'm not really sure sitting and developing in Pittsburgh is going to really be great for him long term. I don't know if they're gonna if they probably has to sit for 2 years. I don't know if I want that out of a second round pick. I don't really love the idea of taking a Jackson Dart super early. If he falls that day, round 3, round 4, maybe. But as far as the quarterback class goes, like I'm not super thrilled with a lot of guys that could take, but I would be happy with a Howard or a McCord somewhere, day 2 probably. So, I mean, I don't I hate that we're always talking about quarterbacks, but it has to
Mhm.
happen just given where the team is at right now. So, that's just kind of general overview of my thoughts on that position because I've started to watch those guys a little bit more here over the last few weeks because it seems like a quarterback will be selected at some point by the Steelers, just a matter of when.
Give me some information on McCord. He's one of those day 2 guys I did not and have not really watched yet. I didn't write the report on him. I ended up doing reports on Howard and Jackson Dart, who may be a day 1 guy now, but point being, did the report on Jalen Milroe as well. My only real takeaway on McCord was the 5 interception game against Pitt, but that's such a 1 game sample size. I don't want to use that to make my opinion or base my opinion off of. So give me kind of the good and bad of Kyle McCord.
I mean, the good is I think the ball really jumps off his hand. He really, really strong season outside of that pick game. I mean, he led the ACC, set the record with like 4,779 yards. I mean, he had some help. He had Aronde Gatson, Jackson Meeks are 2 guys who are going to get drafted. That were real weapons for him. They had a strong run game as well with Quint Allen. And I do think that pick game's, worth bringing about because one of his weaknesses is kind of his decision making. His ball placement at times isn't always great. He'll sometimes, overthrow receivers, lead them too far. And we saw that at the Shrine Bowl as well. I mean,
Mhm.
there's times he would just, miss throws. But I think there's enough to work with there, given, the ball velocity, the arm strength. He can use his legs a little bit. He can get out on the move. So I think as a developmental guy and, second, third round, probably third round. I think in I second round might be a little bit of a reach for McCord, but I think as a developmental third round pick, you could do a lot worse than somebody who does have really good arm talent. And I mean, the Steelers they do like the pedigree. He had good pedigree coming out of high school, played at Ohio State, so he's played against some really good Big Ten defenses before as well. So I like the overall body of work, and I mean I don't think he's a day 1 starter. I don't even think I would be comfortable starting him going into year 2. But I think as somebody, if they can really work on his decision making and his ball placement, he's somebody that could be a decent piece down the line if the Steelers can get the right development out of him. But I really just it was fun to watch him, and it is fun to watch his tape just to see how the ball kind of explodes off his hand and the velocity that he has on his throws. So especially when he can get down deep and he works well over the middle of the field. He worked with Gatson a lot this year over the middle. So definitely an intriguing player to me in this draft class.
And I know we talked about it some during the roundtable, but was he the best quarterback at the Shrine Bowl?
Yeah, yeah. I wish he played in the game. He warmed up for the game, didn't play for some reason, but during the week, I think he was far and away the best quarterback that was there. It was him or Brosmer, but I think McCord probably took the cake over Brosmer for me.
And I'm guessing McCord didn't play because the week was so good. He had done kind of all that he needed to do. That's going to become the trend. The guys that have a couple of good practices either leave early or they just don't play in the game.
Yeah, yep, exactly. It was one of those decisions. I think his teammate Aronde Gatson didn't play either. It was just one of those things where that showed enough. There's no need to go and play in the game.
Gadsden's a pretty good tight end. He's not got much buzz. I know it's a good tight end group, but that's a guy that we should be talking about more, shouldn't we?
Oh yeah, he's a very good tight end. His dad actually played for the Steelers, a training camp deal,
Oh,
or not training camp
okay.
deal. He was on, I think, 97 or 98. He was on the team in camp before he played for the Dolphins, so he's got the bloodlines. And he was, I mean, he was the best tight end of the Shrine Bowl. I think he is. It's a super strong tight end class this year.
Mhm.
But he is somebody that I do think is probably a day two pick. I mean, he's got good size. He's 6'5". He's athletic. He can go. Does a really good job high pointing the ball. So I like if the Steelers are going to take a tight end, which I do think they are. They were paying a lot of attention to the tight end groups at the Shrine Bowl. I know Gadsden, and it was only day one, but I know Mitchell Evans was a guy that they had their eye on, but he stopped practicing because he played at Notre Dame. So 16-game season, he practiced for one day and then shut it down. But he is somebody that the team was watching, and I think could be a name to watch if they. I just don't know if they're going to take a tight end that early, given their other needs. But if they
Right.
do, it certainly could do a lot worse than taking a guy who could be a really good receiving option next to Pat Freiermuth, give you two kind of good receiving tight ends who can work and kind of help that over the middle passing game uh, go to the next level.
Man, that Syracuse offense had some guys because I just watched LaQuint Allen, who you mentioned, their top 1,000-yard running back, and he's a really interesting guy. He's probably the best receiving back in this year's class. He caught 60-something balls last year for the Orange. He's a high-cut runner, question the long speed, but he's a tough guy that plays bigger than maybe some of the inherent power that he lacks. He's got smooth, natural hands and route running ability. He's got good vision, downhill guy overall. You do again wonder about the lack of the big plays in the run game. What his true long speed is, it's probably average, but that's a guy that's probably going to carve out at least some sort of third down passing game role in the NFL. So with him, McCord transferring in, Gadsden, they had a good trio there.
Yeah, no, and their offense coordinator I think he had an interview with, he was the Giants running backs coach 2 years ago, got hired by Syracuse last year. He interviewed for the Texans OC job before he signed an extension to stay at Syracuse. So, I mean, coached by a guy that NFL teams at least have some interest in and who has some NFL experience. So, just, something worth noting there as well.
Yeah, yeah, good information there. So any other draft guys? I don't know if you anybody been watching. I'll go through a couple of names if not, but want to give you the floor, Joe. If there's any other draft kind of quote unquote profiles you've been watching.
Yeah, nobody else really off the top of my head that we haven't, super talked about in the past, on or you or Dave or you and Ross or me and Ross on the pod. So nobody else really jumps off the top of my head. I mean, one guy that does intrigue me a little bit if he falls to Steelers is Benjamin Morrison, but I don't know how much I love taking a chance on a guy coming off a hip injury that could impact his mobility,
Mhm.
especially when you can take defensive line in the first round. I'm in favor of taking defensive line in the first round over a cornerback. I think you can probably get another cornerback in day two, but he is an intriguing name given he was top 10 buzz before the season and he might be there at 21. But the injury is obviously something that it is a little bit scary for sure.
Do we know the extent of the injury? Was there surgery? Do we know exactly what it was? How much detail is there on him with that hip injury?
Do believe he had surgery. Um, I'm not sure exactly. I know he was out for the season, played 6 games and went out for the season, and it was so he did have hip surgery,
Okay.
and hasn't came back yet. So, I mean, you haven't seen him play after the surgery. How much of the mobility is still there? And obviously, for a cornerback, your hip is super important. Your hip mobility and hip flexibility. So, if that's impacted at all, then that's going to be problematic for
For
his
sure.
draft stock.
Do we know, did he get hurt? Was this a freak injury? Was this a nagging thing, a chronic thing? Do we know exactly how the injury came to be?
He got hurt this season, so he got hurt against, let me look. It was
Okay, so there was like an
against
individual play where he fell or something, and that's where the hip injury came from?
yes, he's got the injury in a game against Stanford this season, so he got
Okay.
hurt and then out for the season.
And he didn't participate in any of the All-Star games? Not even sure what the status
No,
was for those? Okay.
he did not.
But we'll be at the combine, obviously, in Indy next week, and he'll be
Yep.
probably poked and prodded. And not even sure we'll do interviews because sometimes those guys that have all the medical issues barely even get the chance to make it out for interviews. But hopefully he does, and if so, we'll talk to him and kind of get feedback. One name to watch for. Let me ask you, when it comes to quarterbacks, I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot here, make you choose, but I guess I am. Who do you like better, Will Howard or Kyle McCord?
Will Howard.
Okay, what's kind of the difference between giving Howard the edge?
I think Howard's accuracy, I think Howard's ability to use his legs is better than McCord. And I just think you have a guy that proved he can win last season. He stepped up late in that Notre Dame game. I like the attitude that he comes with. And I do think, I mean, the arm talent, I think is decently comparable, but I think you give Howard the edge when it comes to accuracy. And you give Howard the edge too when it comes to using his legs a little bit. So, in general, I think Howard just a better prospect.
I know there's been some questions about Howard, his decision making, his processing. I still need to go back and watch his couple first games at Ohio State. I watched a lot of the playoff run. I watched some K-State tape as well to kind of get a contrast when he wasn't playing with the elite talent that he did. I still like this tape a whole lot. Watched that Texas game, that big comeback he had that almost brought him all the way back from being down. I think they were down 17-0, 27-7. They sent it to overtime. They lost it in a heartbreaker. I wonder with Howard that is kind of the knock on him. Some of the processing. There were more picks at K State, but when it comes to Ohio State, I think maybe some people have to give him some grace for some of the early season turbulence. This is a new system, first year with a new team. Probably a pretty demanding OC and Chip Kelly, and so it's probably to be expected there were going to be some bumps in the road early, and then by the end of the season, he was fantastic. You watched that playoff run against Oregon, against Notre Dame. Howard was lighting it up. And so, to me, to see some early season struggles in a new system, kind of getting thrown into the fire like that, it's not a big shock and shouldn't be a huge knock on his game.
Oh yeah, I fully agree with that. I think moving into, and I mean, you have the weight of the world on your shoulders as the Ohio State quarterback, and moving into that and learning, a whole new system is something that isn't going to be easy. So I fully agree. I mean, I think you should definitely value what he did later in the season ahead of some of the hiccups that were there early on.
Yeah, I agree. Just to go through for me, some of the couple of player profiles that I posted on the site over the last few days. Again, LaQuint Allen's going to go up probably for tomorrow. Mentioned him, really interesting pass catching back. We did a report on Theo Weiss Jr., the other Missouri receiver. Luther Burton III is going to be the guy getting a lot of buzz, maybe even some talk about Pittsburgh potentially considering him if he's there at number 21. Weiss is bigger, stronger. He's a yak guy. There was a little bit of athleticism there. He didn't play as big or as physical as I would have liked, as his 6'2" frame would have suggested, but he was productive despite really bad quarterback play, and actually was almost as productive as Burton. He had about the same number of receptions, more yards, only a couple fewer touchdowns. So I think as a draftable guy in Theo Weiss or some of that yak threat post catch, he's a good blocker as well. But it's going to be a late day 3. Speaking of which, what did you think? Brady Cook was at the Shrine Bowl, correct?
Yes, he
What did
was.
what did you think of him? Because I don't typically get too wrapped up in quarterback play, even judging receivers. I know that's there's such a key relationship there, but I couldn't help but whenever I was watching Weiss that Brady Cook just seemed a mess. Was it a good Shrine Bowl? How did Cook look at the Shrine Bowl?
He was up and down. He was definitely better when he could get off on the move. Which obviously in those settings you can't really there's not really an opportunity for you to get on the move and make throws, but he was better when he's on the move. We talked to some guys from Kansas City down there that said he was dealing with an injury pretty much all season, and that's kind of
Okay.
been the story of his career at Missouri. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago he tore the labrum in his throwing shoulder, played through it, and then they found out at the end of the season his other shoulder was hurt too. So he was dealing with 2 shoulder injuries last year. He was banged up. I know the game against Auburn, he went to the hospital mid-game, came back and led a game-winning comeback. But
Oh
uh,
wow.
so I think the injuries are kind of the story there. But I don't love him as if we're talking as a starter in the NFL. Just there, he didn't show enough during the week, and he struggled in the game, as did everybody on his team on offense. But it was more up and down than you would have liked. If he was playing, you're presuming that he's probably healthy. There were some missed throws. Just wasn't doesn't really have a future because he's just doesn't really as a pocket passer, he doesn't really have the traits you kind of need to succeed. He's definitely one of those guys that's more of an improviser that is a lot better when he can get out on the move. And we saw that a little bit when he was able to do so, but in that setting, just not the opportunity for him to show it. And obviously, you don't want a quarterback that's really only better when he's able to escape and create and improvise. You want somebody that can stand in there and make the throws that you need to make. And he hasn't really shown the ability to do that as often as you would like.
I don't want to say good, but I'm almost glad to hear there was an injury because it explains why Cook struggled so much because there just was some really uncompetitive throws that he made consistently on tape that certainly didn't help and really hampered guys like Weiss and Bird. But I still believe receivers can be evaluated independent of quarterback play. And I thought Weiss, he was not the vertical receiver that I thought he could be and should be based on the frame, his vertical tracking, being able to finish some of those plays, jump ball, contested situations an okay separator. There was some burst in the quick game, the three-step game, some of the slants he would run. You would occasionally see him with some nuanced route running downfield, but I need to see it more consistently. I think athletically, he's average too, maybe slightly above average. He's going to be a yak guy, a strength guy, break tackle kind of a guy that might be a Z receiver, maybe a big slot type. His hands are decent, and so that's kind of where I see Theo Weiss. Did report on Upton Stout, the corner DB from Western Kentucky. He's kind of gotten some buzz this cycle, kind of a sleeper in some regards. He's an undersized guy at 5'8", a buck 80, but he plays big. He's got an alpha mentality, played in the slot. He's physical, he'll come downhill, he'll pop you. He's a guy that, is fluid in his pedal. His speed, it looks okay. It's not going to be great, but he's versatile. He's smart. He's an active communicator. He had 4 interceptions a couple years ago, so there was some playmaking on his resume. The lack of size is obviously looking to be the big concern. He gets bullied by stock blocks in the run game, but I thought he held his own in big moments. In 2023 against Ohio State, he went up against Marvin Harrison Jr. for most of the game and really held his own. Harrison had a touchdown in that game, but that did not come against Upton Stout, and so you saw him play up the competition. I really wish he almost went to Michigan in 2024. He took a visit to Ann Arbor. He was really wrestling between, do I go to Michigan? Do I transfer? Or do I stay at Western Kentucky? And really surprisingly, probably to most, he stayed at Western Kentucky because he didn't want to go and be at Michigan for 2 years, which he kind of felt like he had to do if he transferred. He didn't want to transfer and then leave after one season. So he stayed at Western Kentucky for his final season, redshirt junior year, and then declared. And so that's a guy that's going to have size concerns, but I think will be at least a hair on fire special teamer and had some fun tape. But obviously when you're 5'8", a buck 80, it's going to put you in a day 3 category to begin with. And I want to see how that guy runs. I think his effort, I think he's all hearts and smarts. I think athletically though, he's going to be just okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that's tough when you're that size. If you're not gonna be a super athlete, it makes it a little bit tougher to adjust. But I mean, I saw the buzz of the Senior Bowl and definitely somebody intriguing to watch late.
Yeah, I'll have to ask Ross or Jonathan how Stout looked at the Senior Bowl because I want to get a read on him. And then Jalen Conyers is a really interesting guy from Texas Tech. He had been to a couple schools. He was at Oklahoma and then went to Texas Tech, came back home. There actually was also at Arizona State. He went to Oklahoma first and then Arizona State and then Texas Tech. I don't know what to do with the guy because he's got a really unique body type. He's 6'3", 260, power forward, was a basketball star in high school basketball, his first love, ended up playing football and succeeding there. Jump ball machine. He's got the size to block. His blocking was really inconsistent. He barely worked out of a 3-point stance, but he's a really interesting move guy that I think has traits to draft day 3. And you try to, I don't know exactly how you're going to use him. You're going to get, it's going to be a creative OC. I kind of compared him to Blake Bell. I was trying to find a comp for this guy. It was tough to do, but Blake Bell was kind of this unique body type at tight end, former quarterback. Conyers was a quarterback in high school before making the transition to receiver, I think in high school, and then tight end in college. He even threw a touchdown pass at Texas Tech, even played Wildcat quarterback at Arizona State, had a couple rushing touchdowns. So interesting guy. Could that be a fit for Pittsburgh? I don't know. I mean, potentially given kind of the tight end heaviness of the Arthur Smith system, but he's going to have to develop as a blocker and there's just the size there that can do it, but he just has not worked at it a ton. And so I just kind of don't know what to do with this guy, but the traits and the high end plays are there that makes him probably worth drafting late on day 3.
Yeah, he was at the Shrine Bowl too. He had a tough first day of practice. He had 2 bad drops, but he recovered, and he was pretty solid throughout the week. I mean, like it was a strong tight end group there, but he was somebody that definitely stood out and made a few plays, and he did pretty well in the game. If I remember correctly, I think he had a couple of catches there. And like you said, just super interesting body type. And yeah, it's tough with a tight end that's not a great blocker, but He is somebody that kind of caught my eye a little bit, especially with the way he rebounded after a tough start there.
Yeah, there were a couple drops on tape, but I mean, his ability to make some of those tough contested catches and those jump ball moments tell me he's got really good hands. And maybe there's just a focus thing or maybe some minor technical point to clean up on. But I mean, he's got really good hands in terms of making those high degree difficulty receptions. I don't want to say that he can't block when you're 6'3", 260. There's a potential to block. And I thought in the rare moments he did some inline work that was against, I forget which team it was, maybe Oklahoma State. He got in a couple of inline base block snaps on the D end, and he did pretty good. But there was some, anytime he's working in space, trying to pull or climb, he's kind of a long, he's this weird athlete. Like he is athletic because he's making these crazy plays, and there's his background all speaks to an athletic profile, but it's kind of this big, I don't want to call it lumbering, but it's a linear type of thing. It's a build up speed type of thing. And so that's kind of, I don't know, it's just hard to get a read on this guy. But interesting traits. I think, like I said, draftable. Pittsburgh day 3. If he's there in the 7th round, maybe he goes a little bit higher than that. But just a guy that I really couldn't quite figure out, but a guy that I kind of just kept liking to watch. And so just one of those intriguing prospects late on day 3. All right, Joe, I think it's probably going to wrap things up. Anything else, any late breaking news that might have come across? If so, let me know. But I think otherwise we can start wrapping the show up.
Yeah, no, I have not seen anything breaking going on. Luckily, we don't have another Trevor Lawrence report coming out today.
Yeah, that's a whole situation there. All right, we're going to wrap things up in my world famous outros. Dave Bryan should be back on the show for Wednesday. No live stream tonight. That's like part of our planned schedule, but I just like to announce that each Monday. So anyone who wasn't sure is aware that'll be next week for our next scheduled live stream on the YouTube channel. So you can follow Joe on Twitter, and you should, at jclark1233. You can follow me on Twitter at Alex_Kazor. Follow Dave on the site on Twitter at Steelers Depot. You want to send an email to the show? We'll do some emails returning for Wednesday. You can do so theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. Donate button on the screen if you are so inclined. We appreciate that. We have a new app as well. It's out in the newsletter each day for iOS. Download it. Let us know what you think. Just kind of a different way to have the Steelers Depot experience. So for Joe Clark and myself, Alex Kazor, thank you for listening to another edition of the Terrible Podcast.